To begin, I would love for each one of the panelists to share a little bit of your personal background, something outside of your professional CV, if you can. And Veena, can we start with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. Great to be here. So just by way of my personal background, so I am from South India, but I grew up in Saudi Arabia. And so, in Saudi at the time for expats, they didn't have 10th grade. So I had the opportunity to come to the US for boarding school. So it was a first time coming to the US, and I was the first one in my family to come to the US. And then went to Mount Holyoke, which is a women's college, and actually where I first got introduced to the idea of finance as a possible career. And then over the next 20 years or so, I lived on the East Coast as well as the West Coast. Currently live in New York City. I have 3 young boys, twins who are 9 and a baby who is 2. So very excited to be here and look forward to the conversation.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is my turn. Sorry, everybody. I'm actually in Hong Kong and I'm in the hotel quarantine right now, which I think Hong Kong is still the strictest in terms of how they restrict COVID. So I have another week to go and another 3 PCR tests. So that's kind of where we are in the state of COVID here. So my little bit of my background, I was actually born in Bangkok, Thailand, but raised and grew up in Hong Kong. And then I went to local school in Hong Kong and then off to university in San Francisco. So I went to University of San Francisco for my college degree. And subsequently, I joined investment bank, Goldman Sachs, and then UBS for about 15 years. And then in the past 15 years, I was actually managing my own company together with my 2 brothers, Gaw Capital Partners. In terms of personal life, I have 4 children. They're pretty grown up. Their ages 21, 20, 18, and 15. 2 girls and 2 boys. And outside of my main career, I have always been actively liking to mentoring students and professionals. And I'm also very involved in the educational field, taking part in various educational institutions, boards and advisory roles. Another area of focus for me in recent years really relate to the climate and environmental ESG areas, driving changes, necessary changes. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for having me here today. It's so fun to see everybody in person. I hope this is a trend going forward, especially after so many kind of stops and turns along the way. So I'm Japanese American, born in the US. My parents came over from Japan to work in the United States. I grew up in New York and in a largely kind of middle income, white neighborhood. So I thought I was just kind of one of the pack, even though I looked quite different. Went to college at Williams and then ended up going to Japan. And when I was in Japan, I was amongst, a lot of Asians, but I was still different because I was Japanese American. So I wasn't classified as being kind of your typical Japanese. And, it was interesting because I realized that, people kind of put you into different categories. So immediately I was, it's the, the Nikkei Nisei, it's the Japanese American. But that was okay with me, because it still kind of put me separate from the rest of the crowd and actually, I think, helped me a little bit in Japan because it was tougher at that time. This is well over 30 years ago for women to get roles that were a little bit more senior. I ended up in Hong Kong, was only going to stay for 2 years, ended up staying for 18, got married, had children, ended up working at Capital, luckily found Capital, and moved to the US about in 2012, so close to 10 years ago. I've always been a proponent of women and girls. So I was one of the founders of the Women's Foundation in Hong Kong. And at that time, it was really about equity, and ensuring that through research, trying to drive programs in Hong Kong. And actually, I convinced Tina to come on to the Women's Foundation afterwards. So we've had a long history together. I worked with her when she was at Goldman Sachs. And we have some funny stories that we can share throughout this discussion later. But again, thank you so much for having me here today.
Wonderful. Certainly, I can relate as a first-generation Chinese American. The bicultural upbringing certainly influences all of our and shapes our leadership and who we are today. So we will definitely get into a lot of that. I love to start the conversation, as you can see on our slides, in terms of the current state of the industry with women in finance and investments. We all know that the fields of investment and finance remains to be very much male-dominated, even though we know diverse companies outperform non-diverse companies by a wide margin, 36% for ethnically diverse, 25% gender diverse. Yeah, it still remains the status quo. In the 21st report, although women are making incremental progress in senior executive roles at the 20 top global firms, and I was pleased to see Citi on that list, with Jane Fraser as our first female CEO. So that was fantastic. And we also know that attracting women in the entry level is not an issue. There are 52% of entry level women across the industry, but representation falls off at every step of the corporate ladder. So for Asian women, metaphors like the glass ceiling or the bamboo ceiling are very well known. But we also face the broken rung, which is referenced in some of the slides here. So Noriko, I'd love to start with you. Where do you see women, and Asian women in particular, in the investment management industry today? And can you perhaps share your experience, whether it contradicts or confirms that data?
Well, I think it absolutely confirms the data. And I was just looking at recent data that the FT had published at the end of last year, but for investment management, again, at the entry level, there are quite a lot of women. So 40% of women, at the entry levels within an investment management firm. And this is, I think they were surveying some of the largest firms globally. But then when you go to the portfolio manager level, it drops to 18%. And 18% is actually an incredible increase over the past 10 years. It used to be below 10%, about 10 to 15 years ago. So the numbers come up, but it's certainly not even close to being 50%. And I think that there are many different reasons for that. I don't know if the rung is broken. I think that there are different ladders. I think the ladder has just been shorter for women, and I think that there are many systemic and structural reasons for it. And I believe that, you just need to build higher ladders, longer ladders. And I think that's kind of what's starting to be done, but it really starts from top down with senior representation. Just like, you mentioned Citi, but that's where you need to start. You have to start with leadership, senior representation, and then have accountability. Like, we don't have a lot of data on Asian women in investment because there isn't any data. There's no transparency. So I think as part of the community, we have to start demanding it. You have to start asking the companies to give you the data. You have to ask them to be transparent, and to be able to provide it on their websites. Like, why don't they have it? And so I think we're just starting to see companies do that. But it's pretty basic, more basic information, maybe on gender and some broader categories of ethnicities. But certainly, when you drill down to kind of Asian or even different groups of Asian, you're not going to have any of that kind of data, that's detailed yet.
And hopefully that's something AW would hope to do in terms of research on Asian women and representation in terms of that data. And I couldn't agree more because we always say what you can't do, what you can't measure, right? So Tina, I'd love to bring you into the conversation. Before you joined your family practice in real estate and private equity, as you said, you spent 15 years as an investment banker in both Goldman and UBS. Can you talk about your experience as it relates to this broken run? And did you experience any, biases or observed any?
Sure, Denise, thank you. So I started my banking career in the early 90s. So during that time, I did feel that as a woman, I have to do more and consistently work harder to prove my worth, to prove that I can handle the high pressure of a trading floor, long working hours, and all the other pressure that comes with an investment bank environment. But over time, I find that as I progressed and moved into middle management, I actually felt that there is less hurdle to advance to the top. That's actually mainly due to the fact that there's natural attrition happening in the middle career with women leaving the industry. And it's actually from the obvious reason that was mentioned above and what Noriko was sharing about structural issues like long hours, high pressure, and also at the stage that many women are starting to have their family. So that would result in natural attrition. And then well into the 2000 era, the multinational companies in finance field are also starting to focus slowly, but gradually into the gender equality and diversity aspect. Although I recall vividly that there wasn't anything yet relating to well-being and balancing life between work and play being a key focus at that time. They were just focused on, oh, maybe we need to retain more women. And by saying that is, I remember as Noriko was mentioning about funny stories, is that, we have our kids, our older kids are kind of similar ages. And I remember after I give birth, and go back to work, there wasn't any particular room to kind of do any type of, milk or whatever that we needed to do. Those are funny stories, okay? But I think nowadays, most of the company have very, very good facilities or privacy that is that has brought on. I think so looking back in that, I think it is very, very important to continue to promote women to senior position, as Noriko was mentioning earlier, because as more and more women are able to be retained and enter into top management, there has obviously been more effort for the senior women, especially career moms, to also fight to create a more welcoming work environment for working moms, leading to more programs being introduced and, for example, tried, like flexible work week, co-share jobs, etc. Now, how successful those programs have been run or not, that's certainly another topic in itself. But in my experience, or at least during my time in the investment bank days, they did not really work. But at least those dialogues have opened up many more channels for a broader development in diversity, equity, and inclusion that come into play much more heavily in the past decade and have seen its intended results, although we still have a lot more work to be done, as seen in the statistics Noriko and Denise have provided. Yeah, so that's kind of my own experience, but I wouldn't say, as Noriko said, it's not a broken rung. It's more about like there's also choices in the middle part of our career as to whether we could really work to balance both sides and have a supportive spouse. Yeah, I suppose that's very important too.
Yes, absolutely. And Veena, I'd love to bring you into the conversation. You mentioned you were born in India and lived many years in Saudi Arabia before coming to the US. How did your journey influence perhaps the perception of opportunity or obstacles for women?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I did grow up in, I'd say, two very more restrictive cultures with respect to opportunities for women at the time. And so when I came here for high school when I was 13, it genuinely felt like a whole new world. Like I felt like I had so much more just opportunity and things to do. And so my perspective was less absolute. It was definitely very relative. I started out in banking at Goldman and worked at Lehman and worked at both large and small organizations. And I think what was helpful for me was I was fortunate enough to work in small teams with large mandates. And so my value add. It was just hard to like not recognize it just because these are very small teams with a lot to do. And so it was easier to get recognized for it. And it was often a more supportive environment. And then the other thing that I think was helpful was I did work for, I had good managers who recognized like the value that I brought, and as well as like found more opportunities for me. So, from my perspective, I don't want to say it's a meritocracy. I think there are definitely barriers, definitely many things to improve. There's structural considerations. But because I looked at it more from a relative perspective, I kind of just didn't focus on that aspect of it, and worked as hard as I could. And the combination of that and working in smaller teams in markets that just scaled over the last 20 years, I think was what was very helpful. So I agree with everything that's been said. And only that, on a relative basis, from my experience, the US still continues to be still broad and deep with respect to opportunities. And I think it's really important that large organizations are absolutely focusing top down on introducing diversity. I've seen it at my current organizations where sometimes it feels unnatural and clunky, but that said, it's still incredibly important, and it's something you kind of have to do. And it is, something, it's a step at a time. And I think we're continuing to make progress.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think I heard all three of you say that you've spent time at Goldman, right? Oh, not you. Oh, you, Tina. And certainly investment banking is known for grueling 100-hour plus weeks. And as you are all moms, working moms, can you just talk a little bit about how did you balance that integration with work and family? I know, Tina, you talked a little bit about that before with having a good spouse, but anything else you want to share from that perspective?
Sure. I think, everybody has their own way of balancing. I'd love to hear, from Veena and Noriko as well. But for my part, I think during my earlier days, if I thought about when my children were younger, and I was, majority of that time, I was in the investment bank, and I was also rising the corporate ladder as well. So there were a lot of increasing responsibility during the time that my kids were kind of growing up at a young age. I think that the thing that I probably did better is really prioritization, and also very, very well planning. That everything is kind of planned. So I was being teased by my older brothers, who have spouses that actually don't need to work, but then they were saying that I run my household like a boot camp or something, because everything is very organized, it's very disciplined, it's very time sensitive, that everybody has to get out at certain time, and it's planned. So I think it kind of worked out for our household, but as you could imagine, it takes a lot of coordination, and also everybody get on board with the plan, right? Including my husband, and I think fortunately, and I think many of you would agree, is that having a spouse who is very supportive and shared work at home is very important. Now, the way that my husband is sharing at home is more on the play side, because we raise our kids in the young days in Hong Kong as well. So they are Eurasian children. And so I put them in local school as well, because I want them to learn Chinese. So the academic part during the very early stage of their time in school was really on me, because it's actually Chinese taught. But, looking back, it was obviously all very worthwhile, but there are sacrifices, because I wasn't a very patient mom, because I always only have limited time in the evening. And another thing that I think we did well as parents throughout is that when we are in town, because both of our jobs are investment banking nature, so we travel a lot when the kids were young, but we really try our best to definitely have one being around at all times. And when we are in town, and weekends is always for the children. So there were sometimes sacrifice with spending time with friends, for example, during those 10, 15 years of them growing up. But we made sure that dinner time is a very sacred time for us, that we would talk about our day. We would listen to how their day is. And I think that really over time have formed very, very deep bonding between parents and children. So now that they are grown up, we see them as our friends, and they see us the same. So we have very, very good and open communication channel. And I think one of the things about working mom that is very satisfying is that be it that you have daughters or sons or both, is that it's really a very, very strong role model. And I would say that as sons growing up with a working mom, they definitely respect strong female a lot better. And that is definitely felt. And so to that extent, over the long run, with our society and workplace having both female and men, and we want the men to respect female more so that, they understand diversity of importance and so forth, that it will naturally become more equal. That's kind of how I felt. Yeah.
You make having 4 kids sound really easy for some reason.
I have a funny story about that.
Please do share.
So I remember saying to Tina, like, aren't you happy you're done? This is when she had 3. And she goes, Noriko, I'm pregnant with my 4th. So whatever she says about, her agenda being timely, we should call her Sergeant Tina, because she had her household running like a military, sergeant, but she's amazing. She was always happy, and I think, her point about being strong, but I think when you're also enjoy your job, even if you're super busy and you're not always there, your children understand that, and they see that you enjoy your job and you love it. And I think that makes the time away from them okay. And they will say, I would hear them saying to their friends, oh, my mom's not here, or she's doing this, but that's okay because she really loves what she's doing. So I think there's a kind of a difference in terms of, the nature of the job that you have.
Yeah, so certainly having passion for what you do certainly translates, and they can see that, right? If you're miserable at your job, you bring that home, and they see it too. So I think you really have to model the way. And so Tina, kudos to you. So for those of you who are working moms out there, call Tina for tips. I'd love to bring back us to the McKinsey report that they did in 2021, and this is the Women in Workplace report, and it's illustrating that 86 women are typically promoted to manager for every 100 men. In 2020, though, Asian women were promoted at a higher rate than men, but they lose ground as they approach the C-suite. So what factors are maybe contributing to this, and what do you think each of us can do to help improve the situation? In fact, only 4% of C-suite are held by women of color. Veena or Noriko, would you like to chime in on that?
Sure, I'm happy to start. I think it's an interesting point, like in terms of maybe what people, women could do better with respect to that promotion to C-suite. I think it's a couple things. Like one thing I've noticed is just the focus on networking. I think, and I don't want to generalize, but what I've seen is women tend to want to be perfect at what they do, and are somewhat, don't want to raise their hand if they think it's not a role that they already know how to do, which men seem to do less of. So just like being able to network more, having connectivity to people who are in the C-suite, which is really important just from a recommendation and referral perspective, because ultimately a lot of it is relationships, it's who you know, and it's people knowing you. And so spending more time around networking, developing those relationships. And then the other thing that, I've struggled with this too, is just the idea of self-promotion. I think there is, again, an element of that as you rise, and part of being a leader is also being able to demonstrate to others and have them think you are a leader, which does, and my tendency has always been to quote, lead by example. I think that's great. I think a lot of women skew towards that. But there is a level of self-promotion that's needed as you become more senior, and it feels uncomfortable. And I think it's partly why, you do see less women, because often men in finance and investments are much more just comfortable doing that. And I say that anecdotally, just from my experience.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head because self-promotion is quite contrary to Asian wisdom, right? We are taught to work hard and put our heads down and not tout our achievements. So I think those are the old traditional beliefs that we need to rethink. So Noriko, can you share maybe some tips? How can career women find support in their advancement?
Yeah, well, so I resonate with everything Veena just said, and I think that the tactical solutions are kind of twofold. One is really top down, and one is bottom up. So top down, you really have to again hold very senior leadership accountable to considering a broad slate of candidates, and not just. I think historically, people when they senior leaders when they look at kind of next generation of leaders, they pick people who they identify with, right? Not necessarily who is most capable. And I think now, as you hold, senior management teams more accountable, it's really about what is that slate of candidates that you're looking at, where, and all of these candidates are very capable and have the ability to be next gen leaders, but where is also the diversity on that slate? And so I think that there's that in terms of top down, and also, again, having the numbers, being transparent about like what percentage of Asians, both Asian men and Asian women, go into those senior leadership roles. And then from a bottom-up perspective, again, I totally resonate with what Veena said, but there's definitely a self-advocacy role where, and a lot of it is about, I think she said it too, about being perfect. I think, a lot of us want to be perfect and we don't like making mistakes. But a lot of times you just need to make mistakes. And what people see is you learning from those mistakes and then how you handle them over time. And so if you don't put yourself out there, you're not going to get those opportunities. Like I remember talking to one of our investment analysts, she's a woman and she was about 7 years in, great results. And I had switched teams and I said to her, oh, how come you haven't become a portfolio manager yet? Because that was kind of a time period where normally we would have seen that progression. And she said, well, I'm not ready. And I said, how can you not be ready? Because, your results are fantastic. And she's just she's waiting to be perfect. But she's already perfect. Like, you're never going to be like this ideal of perfection. So I think it's asking for things earlier or asking like, what is that process? So then, senior leadership understand that you're interested, and then, so then they can actually consider you in that slate of candidates. And I think as other leaders, we can identify other people, and then I know this is coming up later, but we can be allies, right? And we can really help people, bring them along, give them roles that develop them, mentor people, be active mentors. If you know that someone has a great response to a question, but they're not saying anything, point them out, bring them into the conversation so other people hear their voice. So I think that there are a lot of things that an individual can do, but I think that there are a lot of things that the community can do.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more on this pursuit of perfection. We have to let that go. It is not about perfection. I had to learn this the hard way early on in my career, to let go of perfection. It's about progress. It's about making progress. I was driving myself crazy. I was driving my team crazy, expecting everything to be perfect. And certainly, this is very well known, right? Women want to be 110% for the job before they apply, and men will be applying when they're 50, 75% ready. Yeah. So this is something we certainly need to advocate and be allies for.
We see this when girls, when the kids are young, right? And so when I was watching my daughter play soccer or basketball, compared to when my son played soccer or basketball, the girls don't take a shot unless they think that they're going to make it in. Whereas the boys will like lob it from, basically mid-court thinking, I'm going to get it in. So it's a different mindset, and same with soccer too. So I think as parents, we need to encourage them to keep taking shots. And it's okay to miss, because the more you do it, the easier it gets. And then the more it's going to go in.
This reminds me of Tina's sharing with us on a prep call about her 4 kids. They're 2 girls, 2 boys, and she saw this in her children. Tina, you want to share that?
Yes. So first of all, I was really delighted to hear Veena and Noriko's experience in a way that it sort of give me a way to summarize 2 stories. One is happening in the private family side, and then other occasions on the work front, which is pretty much draws on what Veena has been saying, which is about for girls, or Asian women in particular, it's very difficult to do the self-promotion kind of thing. And then Noriko mentioning about how, women need to voice out more, be more outspoken. And so the point that I wanted to talk a little bit about is a little bit generalization, but it's also true, is that women and men have different attributes, as we all know, and women have more self-doubt. And I think that is, in a way, something that summarizes what Veena and Noriko sort of mentioned, but in a different way, that it's a self-doubt. So 2 stories I wanted to share is at home, it's, as mentioned, I have 2 girls and 2 boys. And somehow they each come out to represent a very key attributes of girls and boys. So my eldest one is a daughter, and she's the one who is 21 years old. She's a very hard worker, very self-motivated kind, always do things with 200% effort, and still thinks she's not good enough. And she always gets very nervous when it comes to important, like college application or, job interviews, summer job interviews with competitive jobs. She's always finding that she's not good enough and she's not going to get it, even though she's extremely well prepared. And then so she would practice her interview with brother, the second one, who is a son, a year younger than she is. And then so he would practice with her, and he'll be like, well, you are doing really, really well, and you're actually so well prepped. I don't know why you're so nervous. And then my son would be like, well, I don't prep so much, but when I actually go in for an interview, I speak with confidence, and I just sound like what I know I'm talking about. So people believe. Okay, so I'm sure this is not something too foreign to many of you to experience or felt. As Veena also mentioned about cases at work, as in like, the guys would be like, oh yeah, of course I know how to do this, which they probably only get 2 out of 10 qualification checked off. Whereas a girl, if they have like 5 out of 10 checked off, they still would not think they are good enough, right? So things like that. Now, going into real practice, I was also speaking at another conference last November in Hong Kong, where half of the audiences were male. Now, that was very helpful. Most of those are managers, actually. So it was a conference for the built industry. For example, real estate, which is the business I'm in right now, architectural firm, and construction industry related, which is, of course, again, very, very male dominated. And when I talked about the self-doubt phenomenon on women, the example I gave was when a manager put up a job advancement or relocation opportunity that comes with more responsibility and a promotion of sorts, with a description of a list of qualifications, and ask for existing staff to come forward and apply, much of the time, there may be more male applying than female, even if the team has sufficient women to come forward. And a lot of the time it is because the women look at the list of qualifications, and if they fit 8 out of 10 on the list, they still might not apply. Whereas for a guy looking at the list, if they fit half of the list, they will try anyways. So I then see many heads nodding from the male audience during that panel. So the solution that I suggest when I was speaking on that panel is that for the managers, male or female alike, they actually need to actively sort out the capable female members and encourage them that they can do it, reinforce them that they should take up the job. And by doing so, if those capable female then got the role, they will also naturally inspire other female to do the same. Then over time, the available pool of candidates, of female candidates, will grow naturally in the overall industry. So after that panel talk, this is sort of like the the revelation. After the panel talk, I actually have engineering firm's senior leader, who is a guy, came up to me specifically to say he never knew that that is the case on women and the differences between male and females. He doesn't know that, but he finds what I said to be exactly true, that he has 10 female engineers in his team. They are very capable, but none of them would actually voluntarily come forward when such positions or promotions come available. And so he's thankful to actually know that this will, and he will pay more attention in actively seeking them out. So in a way, I view that the male allies understanding some of these aspects between female and male attributes and pay attention to them are very important as well, alongside, of course, female ourselves, fight for ourselves. So I think it's both ways. So those are kind of like the two stories and experiences I wanted to share.
Thank you so much. You touched upon allies and essentially mentors and sponsors. On that note, because we all know it's critically important to have allies, to have sponsors, just as you alluded to help lift and to help, point out, potential opportunities for advancement. I'd love to hear from you guys. And Veena, maybe I start with you. Were there a key mentor or sponsor in your career that perhaps have helped you, with a defining career advancement that you can think of, male or female?
Yeah, I'd say, as in each of my roles, the managers that I worked for, I was fortunate that they were great, like very fair. I think I worked in small teams. So again, I worked at a firm called Pantheon. I joined them to help start up their New York office, and I was a third member of the team, and New York was the busiest office. So, there I just had an opportunity to do a lot, and I give my manager, credit for recognizing that and giving me opportunity to continue to advance. And then, at BlackRock, I think that's been another just great environment with respect to that. From my perspective, I joined to start up a certain strategy there. And so we were a small team within a much larger organization. The head of alternatives kind of made it his, which was great. He was sat on our IC and was constantly looking for different opportunities, both to recognize their team, but also give me opportunities to get to know the firm better and be more of an external as well as an internal representative for our team, which it isn't naturally something I'd raise my hand for, but he would always volunteer me for it. So it was something I really appreciated. And I think it did really help in terms of very quickly just getting more exposure, which I think is important as you advance.
Noriko, maybe you can chime in on what do you think were some of the key drivers for your success if you looked back in your career? Were there, again, defining moments where it really helped propel your career, or was it more a steady progression of experiences?
So at Capital, it's definitely a steady progression.
You've been there for 23
yeah,
years, right?
It takes a while, it's 7 to 8 years to become a portfolio manager in training, and then 15 years to become a full PM. So we're very intentional about everything. I have really benefited from very strong mentors. And they're more than just allies, they're advocates. And I think earlier on, when I was a young analyst, it was really helpful to work with portfolio managers, both men and women, who, when you did well, they kind of announced it to everybody, like, oh, she made me money, like did really well. So then all of a sudden, everybody else wants to talk to you, because they think you can help them make money. And so that kind of advocacy really had a positive impact on my career, and it still happens today. Like, I can be in some of our senior management committee meetings, and I have some great advocates on our management committee as well. And they know that when then I should be participating in a discussion, and I'm not, they will draw me into the conversation. And so again, it's this very intentional advocacy that I think is very helpful. Getting the opportunity to do having different responsibilities that again stretch your limits. I think that's also been a great opportunity for me to continue to learn, but also develop my leadership skills.
And then you need advocates in the room, and you need advocates when you're not in the room, right? Pounding the table for you
Yes.
when they're talking about promotion committees. So it's truly, truly important. Maybe before we move to the audience Q&A, I'd love to hear one best piece of advice that you've received that has really stuck with you and that you can impart the audience today. Let's start with Tina.
Best part of advice. Yeah, so okay, so what I wanted to say is, there was a little bit of transition that I had in the corporate career, and then now running my own business together with my two older brothers. Now, it is quite interesting because during my corporate career, I would say that I was very fortunate that similar to Veena and Noriko, I actually had very good sponsors. I mean, most of my bosses through my career are male, but somehow they are all very, very good with diversity. And so to that extent, I think my corporate career was actually very smooth in terms of the progression. Whereas then I moved and I was an MD already when I was invited by my brothers to join the business, which at that time was sort of like a very young offshoot from a family office type of operation of Gaw Capital. And they invited me to join as a partner. But then because they are my two older brothers, and I'm raised from a very traditional Asian family. So to that extent, there were a couple of years that the adjustment to be made as to they getting used to a very strong, strong-minded, outspoken younger sister came in to tell them, well, you really cannot do this if you want to get institutional capital, which is what which is my expertise actually, was targeting institutional capital, just like I was covering Noriko at Capital Group during my career, right? So that type of client, not family offices or whatnot. So they were not very used to it. Right. But then, of course, looking back, so now we are together for, 16 years now, growing this company to an institutional private equity real estate management platform. I really felt that my corporate career of that full on, corporate career of 15 years helped tremendously to institutionalize our business. Right. Deals are well done, but then, if you don't have the right corporate governance and the right sort of talent management or cultural setting and mentorship, proper mentorship, you cannot grow a company into an institutional platform. So from that standpoint, I think the one piece of advice, going back to Denise's question, is, I was being kind of called by my brothers as like, oh, you're so fierce, like you are like very scary, and all that. And honestly, I had to really put myself. And Noriko has always been like a very, very strong advocate. It's like, yeah, Tina, we are, but we get our work done, right? So it didn't really matter what people say. Right? So now I'm 49 years old. It's like didn't care. Right, I get things done, and there's external recognition. Investors that I deal with very much respect that. So to that extent, I was able to sort of change, I guess, even my own brother's mindset that hey, capable women have certain attributes that you need to value, right? So that also changed the overall culture of the firm. That senior women, as they progress, they also feel a much more friendly environment, right? So the one piece of advice, I guess, is to sometimes all of these things that people say, you just have to be confident that the way you are actually get things done, and being capable is the most important. It doesn't matter what other people describe, so.
And by the way, that family enterprise is now $32 billion in assets management. So you have certainly added a lot of value there. Thank you for sharing that. How about Veena?
Sure. I guess like I would say the one thing I live by is, taking calculated risk. It's always hard to leave something certain and comfortable and do something uncertain and where there's risk. But that's how you learn. There's tremendous upside from doing that. And I've always kind of felt that the downside is manageable. Like, how bad could it be, right? Whatever happens. So, in my career, like, I've kind of taken on 3 increasingly entrepreneurial roles, and it is uncomfortable, but I've loved each role, and I think I've learned what I could have in 15 years in 2, just given the nature of the different roles I've taken. So I would say, yeah, just be willing to be open-minded, trust yourself, and take calculated risk, because that can be really helpful in advancing you quickly.
Great advice.
Yeah, my response is somewhat similar to Veena's. I think it's about, raising your hand and then taking all the opportunities that come your way. Don't turn things down, even if you think that it's not the right opportunity, because even, things that may not seem that appropriate on paper or at first glance, can be very expansion, like in terms of your opportunities, responsibility, increasing your network, learning new skills. So I found that every time I was asked to do something where I was initially like, is this worthwhile? Like, I've done this before. But then I realized after I get into it that, I've just met this whole new team at the company and have developed all these new relationships, or I now know how to do this, where I didn't understand that before, like spent a fair amount of time with our HR team, which now is hugely beneficial from a DE&I perspective. So again, I think that it's, when you do get these opportunities, don't just wait for like the big one, just keep doing them and then show, your managers how good you are at executing.
And that reminds me of one of my favorite quotes that I recently saw. It says, every accomplishment starts with the decision to try. So if you don't try, you are not going to get anywhere. So that's really well said. So I have one question, and feel free in the audience, please, to go ahead and submit questions. I have one question here for anyone who would like to answer. 2 years into the COVID pandemic, women are experiencing increased burnout. How do you manage burnout, and are there any advice? Anyone would like to take that?
Well, we talked a lot about this at work, because I think after 2 years of the pandemic, people were very tired at the end of last year. And, our associates had worked so hard and been very, very productive over, a period that was very volatile, where most people were working from home and there was a lot of stress. So our advice to our associates was really to take some time off, like make sure you spend time with your family and make sure you disconnect, like, find ways to kind of de-stress and to kind of bring a little bit more balance into your life. I think that with hopefully the future flexibility, the work flexibility, we will be given that opportunity, especially working women, to have a little bit more flexibility in how you manage and balance both, work and home life. But we also have to keep asking. So, if your company doesn't offer that flexibility, a lot of companies are. And I think best practice is to offer it, especially if you want to continue to recruit good people, right? So this is where you can be advocates and show, senior managers, like, here's the data, like, these are the things that we should consider.
Yeah. Anyone else?
Yeah, I guess we are doing something similar as a company. Of course, being in Hong Kong, the emotional stress is even more so, because it's actually beyond anything that you could control. It kind of feels like getting a cold is a punishment, because we are not you're not isolating in anywhere nice. They actually take you away to isolate you in a facility camp. So even on this trip that I returned, I was in Singapore for a couple of weeks after kind of going out in the West, and I spent 2 weeks there. And as all of you may know, Singapore is already pretty much returning to normal. A lot of people are getting Omicron and they just kind of self-test and they stay at home, but then I have to come back here, and I was seeing all kinds of people when I was in Singapore. So I was emotionally very, very worried in my, final few days of being in Singapore, because I know that after I come back to Hong Kong, of that 14 days of hotel quarantine, I have to go through 8 times PCR tests, and you just never know what you have gotten and all that. So that level of emotional stress is just at another level. So you can imagine all the people that are being cooped up in Hong Kong, not able to get into China either, and then not able to get out, or if they go out, they come back, they have to endure this sort of pain. So I think what we do to our company is to, allow people that maybe have, overseas families or whatnot, that to just let them go off, right? And then they could just work away from the Hong Kong location for a much longer time. So at least during the time that they are out, when the West has already opened up in the past, I would say 6-9 months, they could be away. And so when they come back, they could endure this a little bit better. So it's about flexibility, as Noriko said, yeah. But I just want to, ensure people know that Hong Kong is still really very bad in that respect. Another level of stress, yeah, but yeah.
Thank you. So we have a question here coming in from Zoom. Thinking of our next generation and looking ahead 25 years, what is the prediction you would be most confident in making for Asian women in finance and the workplace? I'll toss that out to anyone who would like to answer.
That the numbers will definitely rise, right? Of Asian women
so.
in senior representative roles, for sure. I think we're already seeing the numbers come out.
Modest growth.
Yes.
We certainly hope to accelerate that growth for sure. We have another question, and it says, to have it all often requires a great support system. What is yours? Veena?
I'd be happy to take that one. Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, no, when I first had my twins, I was like, I knew myself well enough to know that I couldn't do 100% at home and 100% at work. And I did want both. I wanted to be able to manage both. And so what me and my husband did is we just invested in getting as much help as we could. So my mom moved in with us, which was really wonderful of her when we had the twins. And so she's lived with us for the most part ever since. And we kind of viewed getting just more help as an investment in our sanity. And it allowed me, when I had free time, to actually spend quality time with the kids versus arguing about all the many little things that you have to do to run a household. So that's how we chose to manage it, by just getting help, because I do think it's really does take a village to raise kids, and it's you're not always fortunate enough to have parents or family who can come over, but if you can, it makes a huge difference.
Especially twins.
Yeah,
okay,
I think from coming from Asia, we're a bit more fortunate, and I think Noriko also went through 18 years of living in Hong Kong, and she understands that the Asia support system is a lot better. The grandparents are more like coming for play rather than actually babysit them, but because there are helpers, and so there's just a lot more support system. In terms of your first question is about like looking into the next 25 years, I also agree that with Noriko, that it's definitely going to be a lot more balanced. Partly is also because there are just more career moms in the market, even though it's gradual, but there is a rise. And so to that extent, as I was mentioning earlier with story sharing, is that you raising boys and girls, the girls would actually come out to be like confident. They will be more confident because as a mom, you're gonna groom them to think that way. And then the boys, to a certain extent, would also learn in a household to have equal respect, equal sharing jobs with the female. And so that in itself would just naturally create the work society to be just a lot more balanced from that respect. Yeah.
Can I just add, I think we also need to give ourselves a break. I think that, working moms can't be, perfect at work and perfect at home. Like, things just have to give. And if you make mistakes, or, in my case, I end up at a soccer field and I'm at the wrong field. Like, these things happen, and you just can't get mad at yourself, and you can't be frustrated. I remember, and you have to, the opportunities that you do have, with your family, you have to make them worthwhile, and they have to be positive and constructive. I remember coming home one day from work, and I live about anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour away from my office. So it takes me a while to get home. And, the traffic was, getting me frustrated. I get home and I'm just frustrated. And so my kids say to me, Mom, did you have a bad day? You know? And I didn't have a bad day. My drive home was bad, but my day was not bad. So I said, okay, I need to change something, and you figure things out. So I started listening to podcasts in the car. And then all of a sudden, or I would book meetings with my analysts, when I'm driving home. So I feel like I'm being productive or listening to something that's, that's instructional or interesting. And so when I come home, and there have been times when I've actually driven by my house because the podcast was actually so interesting, but it's, it actually, you're in a good mood.
Yeah.
And then when you're in a good mood, and it just makes everything so much better, right?
What's your favorite podcast?
I like, there are a few that I like a lot. Most are work related, like the Pivot. My son's trying to get me to understand blockchain, so there are a bunch of Colossus and blockchain that I'm listening to, and I like the Daily a lot. I think that's great, Daily and NPR.
And the reason I ask is I'm also a big podcast
Oh,
person.
yeah,
I started listening to Adam Grant.
Yeah, well, I love Adam Grant.
And he's fantastic. So and Brene Brown.
Yeah, Brene Brown.
And Glennon Doyle's the other one. We Can Do Hard Things. So a lot of those to get through those, traffic jams.
So UN, you can collect a list of all these best practices and send them out.
How are we doing on time? Do we have time for one more question? Okay. So I would love to, actually a couple of things. One thing you guys both touched on is Noriko and Tina, you've both worked in US and Asia. You spent half and half. What would you say in terms of that contrast, right, between US and Asia in terms of what you're seeing progress for women?
So I think that Asia is still behind. Right. And when you look at it from like a board perspective, women on boards, like senior roles, it's still, Asia is still slow to catch up. So, but I think that again, we need to start being stronger advocates. So at Capital, what we've done is for the companies that we've invested in, we'll send them letters saying that, look, we noticed that you don't have, gender balance on your board. You're not well represented. And, and so the companies start hearing what we would like for them to how we would like them to change over time. And again, I think it starts from the top and then it will trickle down over time.
Yeah, I think as the same way in that Asia, a lot of things are a little bit slower progress in Asia. They do come, but they come in a slower progress, and a lot of time is driven by the West. And but I think the most powerful change that I've observed in the last, I would say maybe 3 to 5 years in Asia is that there are now government policies, thanks to the Women's Foundation, which associated with, there's a 30% board representation. So the West has been practicing it, the Europe as well. Europe in a very, very big way, because most of my investors in the Nordic region, 50% of the board are women. And so when I was saying that in my company, 32% of its women constituent in the director and up level, I thought we were doing well in our industry, and my investors were like, no. Yeah, you got to reach 50%, right? So it's actually driven by the larger corporates, by those that are actually influential. Government policies are being set now in Hong Kong. We have been able to fight that, on ListCo. They have to, get women diversity at the board level, otherwise they would not be approved for listing. All of these things are actually making companies to change more rapidly. So the development is there. It's a little bit slower, but it's coming.
Thank you. Maybe to close, I would just like to ask each of you to think about one actionable idea that each one of us can take to help lift each other and paying that forward. And also we have many allies in the room and on the Zoom. So as your sort of final departing words, is there anything you like to just share in terms of that one action item, whether it's for ally or for us to help lift each other?
Yes, so I think if you're younger in your organization, find a mentor and work with them on something that you're working on that you would like for them to provide feedback for you. So be, again, a little bit more intentional about it. So I'm going, and it could be as simple as I'm going into this meeting, we're in this meeting together, please give me feedback post the meeting and let me know how I did in terms of managing, this meeting. And I think if you're a mentor, so I've been at a company for a while, you can think about who can I mentor? Who can I help, this week, today, in this meeting? Who is not speaking? Who should be speaking? Maybe this session, I'll let them lead the session, right? So I think it's about kind of helping other people, have a little bit more responsibility that they normally would not have been given.
Veena?
Yeah, I was going to say, I definitely agree with that. I mean, another thing that I encourage, the younger women in my team is looking for opportunities where you can learn just a broader scope of things. Like even if your current role is investing, learn about fundraising, learn about, how do you present to investors, learn about portfolio construction, because ultimately over time, if you really want to head or lead that team, you will need to know all those different aspects. And to do that naturally from a young age, whether it be sourcing, executing, it's important in terms of, and it actually makes it easier as you transition and become more senior because you've been doing it all along. And so, so I agree with Noriko in terms of like finding mentors, being a good mentor. And one of the actionable items that, like I've told, my junior team is, seek out opportunity and really look. You have like an incredible opportunity when you work at these companies. Don't ask for someone to give you that opportunity. Just look for it and learn as much as you can, because whatever you do in the future, it will be advantageous.
Yeah, I
Great.
think
Tina?
what I'm gonna just say something between mentor and mentee. I think in the workplace, very, very important. But I think more importantly is sometimes it's actually from the mentor side as to how you're willing to spend time with the junior staff and make them feel that you are always open in terms of how they wanted to come and talk to you and chat with you, and also to spend time to understand their aspirations, right? Because by doing so, you actually could identify people that you could help more. It aligns with their aspiration, and I think that is actually a very powerful force, not only to discover more capable young people, be it male or female, but more so is actually to create loyalty. I actually find that when managers are willing to spend time with the junior staff and listen to how they think about just general things or their personal development, it's the way that you could capture their hearts. So ended up they become very loyal team members, rather than necessarily when the market is hot they get poached away just because they get paid more, right? So these are, I think, experiences that I have felt made a huge difference. Yeah.
I think, and you'll probably like this, but the one other thing that people can do is become more proactive with nonprofits, right? Because I think that there are a lot of leadership opportunities at a much earlier stage. And you can do a lot of different roles, different functions that you're normally not used to. So whether it's Asia Society or the Women's Foundation, but there are tons of organizations that need good leaders and people who are, who are good at what they do, responsible, and I think there's, a lot of skills development opportunity in those types of situations as well.
Well, wonderful. So there's that call to action. I want to thank each and every one of you, Noriko, Tina, and Veena, for sharing your experience and your personal stories with us. You've imparted so many nuggets of wisdom, and you've brought your unique perspective as a top Asian executive female experience to all of our audience. I hope each one of us can take parts of those invaluable lessons and apply it to your daily practice. And I want to thank again Asia Society Southern California and AWE for putting on this important program. With everything going on around the world right now, it's even more important that we come together as a community and celebrate each other. And the more that we learn and the more that we come together, the better that we are. So really, really appreciate it. And thank you for the opportunity and the continued partnership. Thank you to all of you for joining us.